Welcome viewers to the Kingdom Come program, a program by Methodist Church Ghana to deepen our understanding of scriptures and social actions. I am your host, Dinah Ba Odu. Recently, we've heard of a number of suicide cases across the country, and we are, as part of World Health Day for 2017, the theme is depression. Let's talk. And depression can lead to suicide. So we are coming to discuss this topic to see how best we can protect ourselves. With me at the studio is Mr. Notedua, a clinical psychologist with Ghana Medical School, and our minister, Very Reverend Paul Edu, a minister with the Methodist Church Ghana. Okay, Mr. Dia, let me ask you, what is depression?
Thank you, Dinah, and thanks for the question. As you said, depression is a mental illness, and it can afflict anybody. And we need to help each and every one of us to get a proper understanding of depression. Depression is a mood disorder, which means it relates to how we feel, our emotions. And there are various mood disorders, but depression is one of them. Depression is characterized by feelings of sadness, inability to feel fulfilled or derive pleasure from things we normally do, and of course, the direct symptoms of a depressed mood. Now, I'm sure viewers and yourself will agree with me that from time to time, we experience low moods, or we are unhappy for good reason or justifiable cause. That is not depression, right? When we talk of clinical depression, then we're talking of a certain presentation over a certain time. So we're looking at a situation in which a person feels sad or depressed most of the time, or feels unable to derive pleasure from things they normally do and derive pleasure from. And this presentation has persisted for at least 2 weeks, and they are unable to get out of it. Also, it is important for us to note that this presentation must also impair their capacity or their ability to run their daily lives. So firstly, we're looking at the presentation, the depressed mood, and the symptoms I'll be talking about shortly, and also the fact that it affects a person's ability to cope with their regular day-to-day obligations. And these must persist for at least a minimum of 2 weeks for us to be talking of clinical depression. And there are symptoms of this, and we're looking for 4 or more of them within the span of 2 weeks I'm talking about. Feelings of sadness, feelings of guilt, fatigue or weakness, difficulties concentrating, changes in appetite, difficulty making decisions, and sometimes also a feeling that one would be better off dead, or suicidal thoughts. So these are various signs and symptoms of depression, and when they present themselves in the way I described, then we may be dealing with a clinical depression.
So, how common is depression?
Depression, we in mental health consider to be the common cold of psychopathology or mental illness. The same way a physician might come across a cold very commonly, especially in some parts of the world. For us in mental health, depression is very common. Indeed, in the adult population, you're talking sometimes in the range of about 10 to 15% of adults may experience a clinical depression at some point in their lives. Now, whilst recognizing that depression is very common, I am also happy and confident to state emphatically that depression is also very treatable. Indeed, at the level of advancement we have made in mental health sciences, it is indeed a shame for somebody to suffer in silence or suffer needlessly from depression if it can be properly identified, diagnosed, and treated. So yes, it is very common, but yes, it's also very treatable.
Okay, so Reverend, do you come across your church members who may have symptoms that Mr. Notidu had described? I mean, depression.
Well, they come with different issues. For example, it could be marital. Some could be a daughter or a son who is giving him or her problems. Some will be a family issue about maybe property. Someone was given a will, he has harbored it. Maybe there's some money out there which should be shared, and the person feels that he's being cheated out on him by the other group. And so these are some of the issues. There are many of them, but all these things are there, of which someone can run into depression, as our brother is saying.
Okay, so Mr. Notidu, what are some of the causes of depression?
Okay. Let me start by saying that we've enhanced our understanding of some of these mental disorders, but there are still some gray areas. So I'll be giving some of the known factors instead of calling them causes, because they work together. None of them works in isolation. We know the brain is the executive organ of the body, and it directs and controls behavior, mood, etc., emotion, and so many things. So research has also shown us that people who are depressed have a disturbance of this executive functioning of the brain in both functioning and in both structural dimensions. We can see, and we've been able to detect and understand changes in brain function or structure, and also changes in the way the brain communicates using chemicals. Let me call them neurotransmitters. So there can be a chemical imbalance, and we've also been able to identify and isolate that there are certain parts of the brain that may even differ in size and function in persons who are depressed as compared with persons who are not depressed. So that's one side. We can look at actual biological or physical factors. Now, we also know that persons who are experiencing or likely to experience depression tend to have relatives who have experienced same. So we have some indication of familial or genetic transmission that it can increase your chances of having depression by 1 to 3 times more than the person who does not have a family history of depression. Right? And then, like Very Reverend mentioned also, we can have depression arising out of complicated reactions to environmental stresses and life stresses and life situation. Okay? So there's a complex interplay of these things. For example, we are not talking about treatment or management yet. But for example, if we were to assume that, we know that brain chemicals have a part to play, and therefore we can use drugs or pharmaceutical agents to reverse the imbalance in brain chemicals, then we should expect that immediately in response to that treatment, the person's mood will change. But when we get to treatment, you realize that even after that, it takes some time for the person's mood to lift, telling you that there are other buttons and other factors which come into the mood problem we are seeing. So these things work in concert, so to speak, or even in conspiracy to bring about the mood we are talking about. Sometimes we can actually address the biological factors or the neurochemical or brain issues, and then we realize that, there's also a stressor the person is reacting to. We haven't addressed that. So we've only solved part of the problem, and the depression may persist. So there are various factors and risk factors that may predispose a person to depression. Don't forget also that psychologically, we also, learn or acquire coping mechanisms. Sometimes our coping mechanisms are faulty, and they may make us vulnerable to depression because we don't know how to deal with certain life situations, okay? Or our understanding of even our coping or our capacity. We feel somebody is doing better than us, and so on and so forth. And there are various treatments and management strategies that address these different factors I've talked about.
Okay, Mr. Noti, to further ask questions, we said there are stressful life events that affect us. Can you tell us a little bit about these stressful life events that affect people?
Okay. Again, I proceed cautiously because they are not automatic and they are not general. Falling in love is stressful. Getting married is stressful. Getting employment is stressful. Losing your job is stressful. Failing an exam is stressful. But you'll agree with me that not all of us will have problems on account of any of these things. To somebody, something is a challenge which they might work harder to overcome. To another person, it's almost as if it's the end of the world. So our reaction to some of these stresses, even though I may identify or isolate them, will depend on another complex mix of things. Why does Dinah respond so strongly and negatively to maybe the death of her partner? Whereas somebody else seemed to have moved on very quickly, to the extent that some of us are wondering even if she loved her partner, right? So coping factors, protective factors will determine why my aggregate 3 at an exam is such a big deal for me, whereas somebody even did worse or even failed and seems to have pulled themselves together and they are doing better. So these stresses are unique in the sense that we respond to them differently. But sometimes also people encounter, should I say, a flood of stresses. At the time that your marriage is going bad, something else also happens. And so it's almost as if the world is against you. And then you gradually acquire a certain negative view of the world, negative view of yourself, and unfortunately, a negative view of your future. And this again might contribute to your vulnerability to depression, right? Unfortunately, at the time all these things are taking place, you may be unaware that your view is changing. And this may lead to some of the complications I'm talking about. You see, when we wake up in the morning, we have a certain drive that moves us. When we talk of emotion, we are talking about movement, emotive. When we lose our will and our hope for life, that movement is threatened. So meeting a new day becomes more and more of a challenge, right? So when I mention difficulty taking decisions or concentrating, difficulties with sleep, difficulty deriving pleasure or fulfillment from things you normally derive pleasure from. For example, you live with your family and seeing your children or being with your family gives you pleasure. Suddenly, none of these things has meaning. It cripples your will. So when we're talking about a mood disorder, we're looking at the challenge with that life force that moves you. And for some people, some of these stresses now cripple their will and they are unable to get out of that ditch. For other people, it's only a temporary change in mood. They get over it and they quickly snap back to the daily business of living, which all of us do and sometimes take for granted. So let me also hit strongly that having or getting depression is not a sign of weakness. It's not a sign of failing. It can happen to any of us. But for some of us, this jigsaw of life's complex factors is so stacked against us that we may become vulnerable. And this is why we want to talk about depression. Make it a legitimate subject for people to talk about so that persons, whether in churches, offices, homes, who feel some of these things are familiar, can now legitimately move forward and seek help without being labeled or without being stigmatized.
Okay, so, Mr. Dua, what you are saying is that life's challenges, like Reverend said, difficulties with relationship, jobs, even promotion. Sometimes you are demoted or you lose your job. These are all stresses of life. Or sometimes the way the person himself sees his life, all these things can be stresses that can trigger mood disorder or depression. Okay.
Don't forget also that I said they must meet a certain presentation for us as mental health professionals to consider it a clinical depression. For example, if you lose a loved one, it is normal and expected that you grieve. One may ask, well, is grief different from depression? In so many ways, it is not. You feel the same things, but the sense of worthlessness, the hopelessness, and other things that you may feel may not be as pronounced in a grief reaction. And gradually you come to accept that the person is no more, has passed on, and you pick up the pieces of life. So there are differences, but what we're saying is that it must meet a certain presentation for us to diagnose it as depression. You can break up a relationship and find that for a couple of days you are a bit lost, your mood is, but gradually you come to yourself. We're looking at the presentation, the period or duration, and we're also looking at how significantly it impairs your ability to go about your life. And these are clinical decisions that we make. The layperson may see some of these things, but it needs to be properly diagnosed, and therefore will be able to now move into whether the person needs this type of treatment or this type of treatment.
So viewers, we are being taught depression. So if you are not happy, your mood is low, you can't see your way forward in life, you feel hopeless and helpless. You get up in the morning, you don't feel like getting up to go to work or even to eat. These are symptoms that something is wrong somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have it for a period of time, like 2 weeks and above, then we can say that you are depressed. But before you can say you are depressed, somebody will have to diagnose you. You need to see somebody to diagnose you. Thank you. Now, Reverend, so the church members who come to you with these symptoms of depression, how do you help them?
Well, first and foremost, you have to listen over and over again what the person brought to you before you even organize a diagnosis for whatever problems the person is having. For example, if the person comes and has a relationship problem with a husband, you don't just jump up and tell the person, hey, stop, and then allow the person to go. Mm-hmm. If you go back to the Bible, God says he hates divorce. But if you know that the man is abusive, then there's a problem. That's why even when you go to the court, they will tell you, separate, so that you can ponder over the relationship once again and see how best you can come together. So it will depend on what the person is coming with. Then you can tell the person, do this or do that. But basically, I think the Word of God is there for us to use in helping those who have problems. That's why the Bible has several examples of some of these depressive tendencies that is there. For example, I'll use Hannah. Hannah had a problem, and she felt she must go to God, pray, and then leave the matter there. So to us as ministers, the first point of call is to listen to the person. And then when the person has finished with whatever problems that he brought it, I remember I heard this story that a church member went to the minister and they started lamenting. My husband has done that, my husband has done this, has treated me this way. And then another person came in, a church member of the same church. They started narrating her story. So the minister told the first one to sit down and listen to what the other person is saying. And after she's listened to the second one, she told the minister it's enough. She wants to go. You see, so you don't just jump into conclusions when the person has come, that my husband is maltreating me or treating me badly. You have to listen to whatever the person is bringing, and then you can conclude and give the person the needed solution. So it depends.
Okay, it's about time we go on break. So we shall take a very short break and come back to this beautiful topic. Welcome, viewers, to Thy Kingdom Come program, a program of the Methodist Church, Ghana, that helps us understand the Bible better and also live as God expects us to live. So, Reverend, you mentioned Hannah in the Bible.
Yeah.
That Hannah was unhappy. So, can we say that Hannah had depression? Or we can say Hannah had depression because she kept worrying her husband.
Yeah. Let's take a common home scenario where you are either the first wife or the second wife, and the second wife is having children. And if you want to send any of the kids from the second wife, there will be insults all over the place. And that thing had gone on to the extent that Anna went to Elkanah and complain. And Elkanah said, am I not enough for you? And yet, when they went to Shiloh, she decided to go to the tabernacle and pray alone. And even when she was praying, Eli thought she had taken in alcohol. If you listen to the way she prayed, you realize that there was an underlying problem. She was depressed in the sense that she didn't have kids. Not having kids isn't the problem, but the insults and all the things that were going on in the house made her decide that, okay, let me have my own so that I can also. And even there, he told God, if you should give me one, I'll give that child back to you. She wanted to get out of the environment in which she found herself. And I want to believe that when she even had a child and was sending somewhere to Eli, the other woman would have said, now that you have kids too, you are sending that child away. And so I want to believe that she had a problem, and it could have been very depressive for her. But then she had a solution.
Okay. Can we also say that depression has spiritual causes?
From what Notedua is saying now, it could be either here or there. Because take the case of the lunatic that Jesus met. You're talking about mental problems. Mm-hmm. The lunatic Jesus met at the cemetery. Jesus asked him, who are you? And the answer was, I'm a legion. And in the Roman military term, the minimum amount was 2,000. So I could say that there were about 2,000 demons in that man. And when Jesus wanted to drive them away, he said, oh, please send us into the pigs. So it could have a spiritual connotation. Let's take it as it is. Because when the man came back to his senses, when she had his mental faculties and everything back, he decided to follow Jesus. And Jesus said, go and tell the world what the Lord has done for you.
Okay. Now I'll go back to Methodist. You know, from what Reverend said, the man was hurting himself. And from what you said, people with depression are in low mood and they don't have the drive. So can we say that was depression or something?
Well, to just use that as a hookup, right? There are various causes of depression, and we don't want to automatically insist that everybody who gets depressed will do the same thing. Because there's such a complex range of factors that could cause it. We could be showing the same things, but the causes or the combination of causes will be different for Dinah, Reverend, and Naughty. Which means that we will respond to treatment differently. Like he said, somebody presented at the church, expressed her problems, but heard somebody else's problems, and suddenly she corrected a few things in her thinking. And on that level alone, she felt, I can deal with this. Somebody needs much more than that. Somebody benefits only from the fact, or primarily from the fact that Reverend listened to her. And that is what she needed. I always tell people, there's a reason God gave us 2 of this and 1 of this. Listening is important.
Yes.
And he hit the nail on the head when he said, listen first, find out, what really am I dealing with? Don't just listen to this program and say, everybody who's unhappy is depressed. Okay? Because sometimes, yes, you owe school fees. All right? I can diagnose you as clinically depressed, but you've still got to pay. So let's take spiritual understanding of this. Somebody says, well, this is spiritual. And it fits comfortably within their system of understanding and belief, right? There's an ultimate being, a God above us, okay? And therefore, ultimately responsible for everything. So whether I'm sick or healthy, it goes back up there, and that's the origin of everything. Now, when we try to care for people, we must understand their philosophy or their theory. What do they understand about what is happening to them, and how do they explain it to themselves? For somebody, I must have sinned, I must have done something wrong. That is why this is happening to me. And there are examples, in Scripture where some of these linkages are reinforced, where so and so behaved this way because he had done this, and God was not happy with him, and so on and so forth. So it is not unfamiliar for persons to attribute illness, right, to spiritual antecedents. Now, that is necessary for us in trying to understand the person's distress and how to address it. If I feel and believe this is spiritual or religious and you give me tablets, I'm not likely to follow that for long, because my true understanding is that I must address something spiritually. And that is why you find even in hospitals and healthcare, we have hospital chaplains. We are trying to deal with and heal a whole person, not just part of the person. So even if you move from a different angle, which says this is brain and biology or psychology, there are aspects of it you will necessarily have to address from this angle. The difficulty is whether any of these schools of thought will think that they can work to the exclusion of the other, such that Reverend and I will refuse to talk because we see depression as this, and therefore I say, Reverend, you are totally wrong. Just refer them to me, right? We all have a complex part to play in firstly identifying and understanding it and bringing help, care, and support to people, right? And so we also must see ourselves in sync with religion and spirituality and not in dissonance, right? Or in an antagonistic relationship. And unfortunately, when we don't do that well, what happens is that my client, when she goes to church, will tell Reverend something different and leave out some aspects. And when she comes to me, she'll also give me a different aspect, knowing that she's forced to wear different hats to get different response mechanisms triggered. The beauty of it is where Reverend will see he has gotten to a point where he needs to and wants to make a referral for supplementary care of this person. Do you see? For example, in disclosing and sharing with Reverend, I've actually disclosed and expressed suicidal tendencies and a few other things, right? And therefore, there's the need for acute responses and care for this person. Somebody might say, well, let's lay hands, let's pray, right? But at that point in time and in that state of mind, that person may not necessarily be able to appreciate and therefore benefit from the prayer at that point. The same God gave us the knowledge we are also using. So it should not be systems in conflict, right? There are different explanatory models we can use to explain this human phenomenon we're talking about. And it's important for people listening to us to get these connections. As soon as they see that, then I'm not fighting my God or my faith when I take medicine. Do you see? Because some come to us and they run away and they go to churches. We don't have a problem with that, but they may go to church and also believe that because of that, I do not have to take my medication, right? And taking my medication is disbelieving God and His providence and His, care and protection of me and my life. So we need to have some reconciliation in these systems of explanation and thought, and whether it's depression or anything else, synchronize them to the ultimate benefit of the person, the family, the community.
So, what you are saying, Mr. Tedua, and what Reverend also said, is that a person may have depression and the causes may be different and varied.
Yeah.
But it is also very important for all people who care for persons to recognize the role of everybody, like the minister's role, the psychologist's role, the psychiatrist's role. So, viewers, if you are having challenges or having mood problems or you are not happy, you are allowed to go and see your Sopho or your prophet. But also remember that we have healthcare professionals whom God has blessed so much with this knowledge and skill so that they can help you. So go to your Sopho by all means if you must, but see your psychologist or your psychiatrist or any mental health provider who may direct you or help you manage the cases. So, Sopho, have you come across church members who are contemplating or have told you they wish they are dead or want to die?
No, they come, but the solutions that we apply as Christians is what matters. But there's a scripture in Isaiah 26, verses 3 and 4. It says, "Thou will keep him in perfect peace, him whose mind is stayed on God." If you know there's hope out there, like you were saying, then you don't have to ask yourself that, where should I end my life? I was listening into a program, and I like what somebody said, that committing suicide doesn't end the problem.
I was going to ask that question, whether it solved the problem.
It doesn't solve the problem, because after you are dead and gone, those behind you will have to find a solution to what had happened. And we as ministers of the gospel know that when Christ was living, he left us his peace. And peace can only be found in that intimate relationship with our God. It comes through prayer as a solution. It comes through fellowship when we go to church. It comes sometimes through even the songs that we sing over there. And sometimes too, we as ministers must find time to go on one-on-one. Note was saying that you can do without medicine, and can we do without the church. But I'll say that we'll have to live in tandem with medicine and with the church, so that if we will cooperate. For example, Luke, who wrote the Gospel of Luke, was a medical doctor, a complete one. If you want to listen to all the stories of Luke, the emphasis of Luke was on healing. And in the Bible has a lot on healing. You go to Exodus 15:26. It says, "I'm the Lord that healeth thee." Now the word behind Jehovah Rapha means he repairs, he mends, he cures. So we want to tell those who have those suicidal tendencies, there's a second chance that you don't have necessarily to take your life. Taking your life won't bring the solution. Rather, one will have to confront the issue at stake. That what is it that I want to take my life? Like he said, is it some debt? When you have given the person money, sometimes people don't know how to even manage the monies that you've given them. He'll come telling you, I have this problem, I have that problem. You give the person the money and you use the money for other reasons. So I want to say that when they come, we'll let them know, and we will not always let them know that there's more to life than taking your life. Taking your life wouldn't bring the solution. You either compound the problem. If, let's say, you have about 4 children, and you take your life, what will happen to those children? I did streetism, and a lot of these children on the street are not there because their parents are not there, but because some neglect. Some were not taken very good care of. Some were just thrown over there. But if we as a church will create a needed environment for them to come in there so that we can help them by way of counseling. The unfortunate thing is that then we've been worrying us with counseling. The issue is that there are not counseling centers around for people to go there and then unburden themselves. And you find all kinds of people coming out as counselors who are not trained. So I would kindly use this opportunity to ask the counseling society or the people who are involved with clinical psychology and the rest to help the church establish counseling centers so that when people, not necessarily going to the minister sometimes, but going to visiting these counseling centers so that they can unburden their problems. Some don't have the opportunity.
Okay, viewers, we've talked about depression, the causes of depression, or what brings about depression, and some of the things that we can do to prevent depression or even to get help or treat depression. There's a lot of questions that we need to ask. So we'll break, and then when we come back next week, we'll continue with this very important topic. Thank you. I am your host, Danaba Odum, and with me are Mr. Alfred Nolte Dua and Very Reverend Paul Edu Jr. Thank you.